Hi, everyone. Welcome to Classics You Slept Through. This is the podcast where we read classic books and then discuss them. And this week we are discussing The Metamorphosis. I am Kyle Davis, your host, along with a girl who does not know the pain of a rotted apple embedded in her thorax. My sister, Meredith.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that gracious introduction.
How's it going today, Mer?
It's pretty good, pretty good. I do have a baby embedded in my abdomen. And
probably
that feels
more
kind
painful
of the
than
same.
a rotting apple.
Yeah. I think so. But it will come out, unlike the apple in Gregor's thorax, which we will talk about.
Spoiler. The apple plays large. All right, so for this week's episode, we have read the second half of Chapter 2 and into Chapter 3, completing The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. And in this section of the book, we begin with Gregor finding sort of a new normal with his family. He's discovered that he can hide under the couch, he can pull the sheet over him, his sister can bring him food, and things seem to be going fairly swimmingly when we left off.
He likes it that way, too.
Yeah.
He likes being hidden under the couch and all his little legs tucked in.
Well, he's a bug, you know? We don't exactly know what kind of bug, but he is.
I learned the difference. We talked last week about whether he was a beetle or a cockroach or what, it doesn't matter, and what's the difference.
Oh.
I know the difference now.
It's educational.
Yeah. Beetles have hard shell-like wings. So they have this hard piece of their body that protects their actual flying wings. And then cockroaches have two pairs of wings, and the top pair is really leathery and papery and not hard like a beetle. So it's in the
which
wings.
one could a rotten apple penetrate?
Oh.
See,
good
now I'm
question.
going with cockroach at this point.
Yeah. It would get hit at just the right angle if he had his wings slightly open and then get lodged underneath. Ooh.
A beetle's like armor. It would just bounce off. I don't think an apple would do
Probably.
much damage.
Agreed. So he's more cockroach-like.
Probably more cockroachish.
I'm glad we've solved that. I feel complete.
Exactly. Well, here now we see in Chapter 2, our normal equilibrium with the family is kind of starting to diverge. The family on the outside and Gregor on the inside, they're each sort of reading into each other's thoughts and assuming a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And Greta and Mom decide, you know what Gregor really needs is more room to run around, and we're going to clean this room out and get some of this furniture out.
Yeah, he likes to scurry all over the floor, up the walls, on the ceiling, leaving his little brown, greasy trail behind him.
His adhesive, as the book, as my translation says, the adhesive.
How big do you think Gregor is? Do you think his normal adult size just changed into a monstrous vermin? So he's a 5'9" beetle?
Yeah. I mean, it mentions him standing upright on the dresser.
That's true.
And he uses his mouth parts to open the doorknob. So he's got to be a couple of feet tall. So he's a fairly large creature.
So he's like your size, but a beetle or a cockroach.
I mean, that'd be a pretty swole cockroach, but yeah.
Moving on.
So they start to clean the furniture out, and Gregor does not like this. No. I think at this point is when he realizes that the furniture is kind of the thing he hadn't realized it before, but tethering him to his humanity.
Well, he first agreed with his sister, and he was like, "Yeah, I need some room. Her and I are connected."
Right.
And Mom comes in, and she's like, "Oh, maybe he'll think we've given up on him." Because they have no idea that he can understand them, because they can't understand him and how self-centered of them to just then assume that their experience is his experience, which it is not.
And he ceased trying to talk to them. In the very beginning, when he tried to talk to them, and he completely freaked them out. He's given that up at this point.
Yeah. So Mom wants to leave the furniture, but Greta, in her newfound, I am the caretaker of my brother, I know what's best for him, let's move the furniture, convinces Mom that they should do that.
Right,
and
exactly.
Gregor, in the meantime, changes his mind.
So there's this is the first sort of interesting sentence that I pulled out of it that I kind of want to highlight. But so there's sort of two things at work here. We have sort of, I guess, Kafka / Gregor's narrator perspective on Greta's youthfulness and her youthful enthusiasm, just sort of being like, oh, I'm the caretaker now, and she dives full bore into it. Whereas this sentence, I thought, was kind of the key to her position in the family and her status, right? It says, perhaps this is what tempted Greta to make Gregor's situation seem even more shocking than it was, so that she could do even more for him. Greta would probably be the only one who would dare enter a room dominated by Gregor, crawling about on the bare walls by himself. So it's almost selfish of her. She's not thinking of Gregor at this point, or at least this sentence surmises, by moving the furniture out. So she's not altruistically saying, hey, I want to move this furniture out so he has some more room. She wants to move it out so it becomes, cockroach rodeo in there, freaks out the rest of the family, and hey, I'm the only one that's going to go in there because I can take it.
Look how brave I am. I can stand it. Interesting. That goes along with my feelings towards Greta as the book moves on, because, last time we talked about their special relationship. He wanted to send her to the conservatory. He felt a lot of warmth towards his 17-year-old sister, and then she brings him food, and she brought out, different kinds of food and all of that. And so not necessarily for his own good. As we see now, it makes her look good.
Right.
All right, Greta, I see you. Okay. So they start to move all this stuff, and Gregor sides with his mom in a way, saying like, oh, I've almost forgotten my human self. I haven't even heard my mother's voice in a while. And it starts to tether him or bring him back to his human mind and remind him of who he was. And then he decides, no, I'm very attached to this furniture. And he decides to tell them so in the best way that he can by scuttling and scurrying out and attaching himself to his
girly picture.
Yeah.
The woman in the fur coat, which is apparently in a glass frame as well. So in the beginning, I was picturing more like a college dorm room with, I guess, I don't know, who do college kids have up now? I was going to say Farrah Fawcett, but man, that really dates me.
Dude.
I have on their walls now.
First of all, I have no idea, but maybe probably like a TikTok star.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well.
And you can tell by the way I say TikTok that I know exactly what I'm talking about.
There you go. Charlie D'Amelio or whatever should be underage, so that'd be creepy. So that'd be somebody a little older, right? But anyway, so he's got this girly picture in very, very Eastern European. She's like in a fur coat, muffs, so it's winter obviously. But it's in a glass frame. So
I think he carved the frame. Is that the one his mom was talking about? And then earlier, when she's talking to the manager, she's like, oh, he just doesn't even have time to do his carvings. He thinks about work so much. You should see the frame he carved. You'll see it as soon as you go in. So he's carved this special frame for his girly picture.
Frame for this picture. It's a very important picture to him. Right. So he scurries out and attaches himself to it. And wow.
And
he completely covers it.
Yeah. His mom comes in but doesn't see him right away. But Greta does. And she tries to shield his mom's head. And she's like, no, look down, come out. Mom eventually sees him. She freaks out.
That does not go well.
Yeah. And Greta's like, Gregor, you! And she raises her fist. She's like, how dare you show yourself?
So now she's really taking ownership of him as his caretaker, right?
Yeah, by admonishing him or she doesn't seem so afraid now. She didn't run away. I wonder if her fear is all an act now that I think about it.
Because she's trying to play it up to keep everybody else out of the room.
Yeah, I'm so afraid, but I'll still do it. Who else but me?
Right.
The maid. They could let the maid just go do it. We'll see.
Well, as we'll see later, Gregor's not so frightening that Hildegard, the charwoman, whatever we're naming her, she's not afraid at all. She just goes in there with the broom and is yelling at him.
Readers, please do not go back and try to find the name of the maid. She does not have one.
The maid does not have a name in my translation. It's just the charwoman.
Well, then his mom has to be revived. And then this whole episode of her needing to be revived, Greta needs to leave the room and go get smelling salts or whatever in these little glass vials. And Gregor wants to help, which...
He's a helpful guy. Bug.
He thinks they'll just understand me if I like go up and chew on their clothes or like tug on their leg or something. He comes out of the room and that's when bad stuff happens, whenever Gregor comes out of his room.
Right. So he gets injured by the smelling salt bottles.
So he scares his sister and she drops them. They shatter. And Dad comes home and is like, what's going on? And Greta's face lets him know. And she says something to the effect of like, oh, Gregor's escaped. Or Gregor's let himself out. I can't remember what she says. Something to that effect. And Dad gets mad. Tries to stomp him.
Well, he had passed out on the dining room table, which, I don't know, a giant cockroach laying in the middle of the dining room table is frightening enough for this book. But yeah, now Dad comes home, is pretty upset by it, and goes for probably the most logical weapon choice he can, apples.
Yeah, the fruit bowl on the table.
Right. Well, on the sideboard, because Gregor was on the table.
Yeah. He keeps throwing this stuff at him, and somehow, as we said earlier, an apple gets lodged in his back, and there it stays for the rest of the book, rotting.
Right. He cannot get it out.
And it causes a terrible wound that he continues to suffer from.
Eventually being covered in white dust, which sounds just...
disgusting.
Totally appealing.
I can't imagine even getting that out or attempting. I tried to get a tiny splinter out of my son's foot the other day, and you would have thought I was amputating it in a Civil War tent or something. He was screaming so much.
Splinters are fun the first couple times you do them. Ugh. They get used to them.
And every time I get them out, he goes, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
Okay, well then why the screaming? Anyway, to extract
Of course, he also has limbs that can reach around to all parts of his body, not tiny little legs that he's scurrying about on. So.
That's true.
Gregor can't exactly just twist and get it out. But
no, he can't do much movement at all except the scurrying.
Right. And now with this apple, he doesn't even feel like doing that.
Mm-mm.
So this wound really makes him pretty lethargic. He loses his appetite, decides doesn't really want to eat anymore, kind of lays around. He says there's days where he just doesn't move at all.
He only eats if the food happens to be near his face. Maybe.
Which I guess presupposes that she's going into the room far enough to actually lay the food next to him.
I bet I've thought of it. She puts it in the same spot every day, and maybe he's crawling around slowly, and he's like, oh, hey,
I realize it's here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Could be as well.
Dad's in the picture, and Dad has changed. You mentioned this earlier when we were preparing. Dad used to be kind of like this frumpy, frail old guy who hasn't worked in 5 years. He doesn't change out of his bathrobe.
Sounds heavenly.
He's full on like Dad in the recliner with his newspaper.
Right. Exactly. But now he's got a uniform and shiny buttons, and he's got some pride in himself.
Yeah.
And he never takes it off. I think maybe Dad just doesn't like changing clothes. He's just lazy.
He seems much more energetic and spry, even. And Gregor is like, "What the?" Like,
yeah. So we're seeing now that we're seeing that Gregor's isolation is he's not aware of what's going on with the rest of the family on the outside, and they're changing since his so he's changed physically with into a bug, but they've all had to adapt and change too. So now he was the sole breadwinner taking care of the family, but now Mom, Dad, and his sister have all gotten out and gotten jobs, which we'll get to this, but I found it interesting that when we first, and this could be on their transformation theme, right? When we first are introduced to these jobs, they sound horrible. Like they're backbreaking, they're demeaning. Mom's had to take on, I think she's doing laundry for rich people, and it's just sort of the stereotypical, and it says, this is what poor people have to endure. But after Gregor's dead, later at the end of the book, all three of them go out for a walk and are like, hey, we got jobs with prospects. Things are looking up. We're feeling like we can really dig into this.
Yeah.
So I Gregor being alive kind of colors our perceptions as readers of these professions that they've all entered into.
Well, Gregor, much like we talked about his sister thinking of herself, perhaps Gregor is viewing the family with like, they needed me and now I'm gone and oh, my poor family. He has that feeling throughout. My poor sister, my poor mother, my poor father. They couldn't,
right.
They can't do these things or they couldn't do these things. And what will they do without me? And we see that they'll be fine without you, Gregor.
Seems so.
Is, maybe sad for him and maybe sad for them. Maybe they didn't want to work, but they now seem like they do act, or at least his dad seems like he would like to work. Right.
Well, as we get into chapter 3, we see they do one more thing to try to get some money, and they have taken on some boarders.
Yeah. And they also, we should say, he's able to observe, like he was cut off from family life, and now they leave the door open, cracked in the evening for like an hour, and he can watch them eat supper. And so he's now able to observe all of these things about family life, and he's able to observe now these 3 boarders that have come to live in the house with them, who are more like, I don't know how boarders work, but the family like serves them and makes them food, and it's like a permanent bed and breakfast in a way for these roomers.
I mean, like everything in my life, I just relate it to It's a Wonderful Life, and I think of, after George has gotten his wish and no longer exists, and he visits Ma Bailey's boarding house, there they are, and it's more of, you live there, and the house mother does feed you breakfast, lunch, dinner, and you all sort of sit around together as a strange family. I've seen, you watch old movies from like the 40s and 50s, and, there's like the one angry guy who always sits there, and the other boarder, throws off the dynamic of the meal. And, from a modern perspective, you're like, why does this guy just go get something to eat out in a restaurant or something? Like, why does he have to hang out at the house? But yeah, I suppose that's, you just become part of the family in a strange kind of way.
It's not like the saddest part of that movie, if I may, when he's like, Ma, don't you remember me, Ma? And she's like, she's so upset because she only had the son who died in the war in this life. And is Annie there too?
No, I don't think in that part, no. I don't let in strangers unless they're sent here by somebody I know. Well, I know everyone you know, Ma.
Anyway.
We'll get on a completely different tangent. It'll be a different podcast. So these boarders not only have come to dominate the family life, we learn, the narrator, Gregor, or whomever is narrating this, tells us that in the family's inexperience with the boarders, they're almost over-accommodating. Mm-hmm. And it seems like these boarders really take advantage of them they're at their beck and call for almost every single thing.
Yeah. And this whole time, we said the family's got other jobs. Then they come home and they take care of the boarders. And the sister has now started to be much more lax in her care of Gregor. She stops cleaning his room as well and as much. She's feeding him.
Tired.
She's not really noticing. Towards the end, she's like, oh yeah, he wasn't really eating. Huh.
Yeah. There's a point where Gregor literally says that they should be paying attention to me.
Yeah. Yeah. He's suffering. He's got a wound. He's not eating. He's covered in dust.
Room's dirty. Because of the boarders, they've started to push furniture and extra crap into his room.
Oh, that's right.
In chapter 2, where they wanted to clean the room out and make it open so he could scurry and have fun and, be himself, now they're just like, whatever. And they're just shoving things in there. So even if he had energy to scurry about, he wouldn't have room to do so. So that just kind of spirals him further into depression.
So picturing this room, it's now the catch-all room of the house, which is never anybody's favorite room, although we keep throwing things in there. Although you probably don't have a catch-all room.
Well, yeah, we don't really have a catch-all anymore.
No, because your wife is a professional organizer in some way.
The bedroom becomes the catch-all, and that... Anyway, it leads to other problems.
But like whatever
that's a very American thing.
Whatever that catch-all space is, for us, it's the middle room of the house, which happens to be the dining room. So, our basement door is in the dining room. So if it's going to go down to the basement, it usually sits by the basement door for a while, or it sits on the big dining room table. I remember as kids, Mom would freak out occasionally about things cluttered on counters. Do you remember? And on the tables? You don't remember?
The dining room table is where we drop the mail. That's where you put mail. She don't really get anymore.
I just have such vivid memories. She's like, I can't deal with the clutter. Put this away. It doesn't belong here. And we'd just be like, okay.
That's why we had an attic. You just put everything in the attic and it's fine. Nobody goes up there.
We didn't do that, though. The attic, I remember being really clean. Like, all of your toys were lined up and organized, like the G.I. Joe stuff.
Yeah,
and you had that
not so.
Ewok tree.
Stuff was everywhere.
Really?
It went through phases. Sometimes it would get cleaned up. But
do you know what this is a digression again. You know what I used to play when I went up there? Aside from breaking your toys.
Yes. My children do that for me now.
I remember that door to the chimney. There was that slanted area, and you could open up, and I guess the chimney people could clean the chimney or whatever was up there.
There's roof access too, apparently. I actually never went under the roof.
I did once. Dad and Uncle Jonathan came to fix the roof, and Dad let me up there, which Mom was furious about.
Yeah. They just told stories about how slippery it was, and if you went up there, you certainly would slide off it and die.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
Because it was slate, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was this very angled slate roof.
But, I mean, you're talking 2 stories plus a decent attic. I mean, that was a high attic, so you're talking at least 30, 40 feet up there.
So I used to go up there and get in the crook where that angle was and the roof, and I would just curl myself into a ball and hide and just sit there alone. And I was playing Browns Mill Schoolhouse Massacre.
Oh, jeez.
Because I remember we learned about how a one-room schoolhouse had been massacred by, they said, Native Americans in the area at some point. And it was this really brutal story. You can Wikipedia it if you're interested. But like there was like in my mind, I remember the story. I don't know if it's accurate. There was like a survivor, a child who had been scalped or something. And I would just sit up there as the child who survived, and I would just be like, here I am. I would just sit up in the attic and
hiding,
play this weird game. Much like Gregor hiding under the couch. I would just hide up there pretending I was some weird survivor from this one-room schoolhouse. That's what you play when you don't have any friends as a child and your older brother doesn't have any interest in playing with you at all.
Such a shame.
This is your fault. I blame you for me being a weirdo.
Well,
anyway.
The Wikipedia page does not mention the massacre, so I don't. That seems a strange thing to leave off of the Wikipedia page.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not Browns Mill Schoolhouse.
I mean, that's my memory of it too. So.
Oh, really?
I guess we're both wrong then.
Might be a different schoolhouse, and I maybe I just put the two together because Browns Mill Schoolhouse is still standing in the area, and we used to go visit it on like a field trip or whatever in elementary school. So maybe I'm confusing the two. We'll have to find out and put it in the show notes for later because I know people.
There you go. We will look up that. Wait with bated breath, listeners. We will look up the Browns Mill School massacre and get to the bottom of this. And was there really a massacre at the Browns Mill
And while
School?
you're homeschooling your kids, you can play along.
Exactly.
Choose one of your children to be a survivor.
Be the lone survivor of the Browns Mill School.
Your kids would be into that, I think.
Oh, they would very much be into that, sadly.
Anyway, what were we talking about?
I don't even know.
So
bugs and
the catch-all
So we're at the
room.
Borders, and these guys are pretty demanding. So they want Greta to play some music. Well, I think Dad offers Greta to play some music. So she gets her violin out and she starts playing. And within a few minutes, the Borders are like, this
boring.
is
Yeah.
not good. So they kind of hang out. So now Gregor's watching all this and he's pretty upset because he loves his sister's playing. He thinks it's the best music because he wanted to send her to conservatory so she could get better. And so he comes out. He kind of scurries out and he's listening and he's angry at the Borders, and then, unfortunately, he kind of just hangs out right by Greta, staring up at her, and that's when he's noticed.
And he's wanting to tell her, like, this is beautiful. you're such a good player, and he's wanting to appreciate her music, right? That's why he's out.
But he's a cockroach.
Right. And I don't know what they could possibly think, because again, they think he doesn't understand them. But he comes out and one of the boarders notices him and is like, Mr. Samsa.
What is this? Yeah. They immediately say, we're out of here. And not only are we out of here, but we're not going to pay anything for what we've already stayed because you have this giant cockroach, which I guess is kind of understandable.
Yeah.
You're hiding this thing. I mean, I suppose boarders don't get roam of the house, and they never asked, hey, what's this room over there that nobody ever goes in?
Yeah.
So.
And how were they supposed to know an adult male size
cockroach
was in there?
Exactly.
When I lived in Philadelphia, in Mount Airy, one of the row houses I lived in had cockroaches, and everybody was like, yeah, that's just how it is. If one row does construction, it stirs up whatever is in the whole row.
Oh, wow.
And
that's gross.
It was my roommate Katie and I were mortified. We had another roommate who was like,
it's cockroaches.
It's like whatever. And we're like, dude. She's like, I don't really see them. They're not in my room. I'm like, they are literally like on your toothbrush right now. This is horrible. Wow. And we got out of there.
Aren't they very clean animals, though? Aren't cockroaches very clean? I mean, Gregor doesn't like being dirty.
Yeah, but they like being in dirty places. Like, he likes eating rotten cheese.
Oh, this is true.
I don't think he likes being covered in dust, having rotting fruit in him, embedded in him. But he likes to eat it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was awful. Anyway. It's terrible.
Well, anyway, the boarders react similarly, and they get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And not only do they get out of there, but the family's kind of like, okay.
Yeah, but they refuse to pay the boarders.
Right.
Not just like, we give our notice now, and we refuse to pay you for any moment that we've been in this house.
Exactly.
And yet they expect the next morning, like, where's our breakfast?
Yeah.
We're not going to pay you when we're leaving, but feed us.
Well, when they eventually do leave, the family's just like, oh, they're going. And then they get passed on the stairs by a kid with a tray, and they're like, oh, what were those? And they just completely forget about them. So the boarders did not register much once they finally left.
But they do end up being the last straw. Like, Gregor coming out and disrupting whatever was happening in the evening, his sister's finally like, it can't go on like this.
Right.
We can't do this anymore. And she stops calling him Gregor. She's like, we have to get rid of this monster. I'm not even going to call him. I'm not even going to like soil my brother's memory by calling him by his name. And we have to get rid of him in order for her excuses for us to honor Gregor's life, his human life.
Or really just to get on with our life. Because, I mean, their lives revolve around having this thing in their house. I mean, she takes care of him. She cleans up after him. His loss of income, now they have to go do something else. They're already exhausted. And on top of being exhausted from living, now they have to take care of this bug that doesn't do anything for them. And it's been a long time at this point.
Yeah.
Months and months. Because, when Gregor comes out to listen to the violin playing, he wants to tell her that he was going to send her to conservatory for Christmas. And then he realizes, whoa, Christmas, is it past Christmas? That's been a while. So, it's been probably at least 6 months or more that they've been dealing with this.
Which actually brings me to one of the major things that I've been thinking about and struggling with as a reader, in that the family, including Gregor, is just total inaction. They don't do anything to try and help him. I don't know what they could do, but it's not like they call a doctor. I guess they want to hide him away and they're embarrassed, but they don't do anything. Like, they don't even try to get him to turn back or figure out what happened, or, I don't know, set up a cage for him in the yard.
Well, I think it's a commentary on the plight of the poor at this point. I mean, I'm sure they don't have the funds doctors are expensive. And what would a doctor do? Hey, doc, we've got this giant bug. Have you ever encountered that before? It's like, oh, sure. I mean, what doctor is going to be able to transform a bug back into a human?
And then they just lock him in his room, and his Dad asks, so sister proposes, we can't go on like this, Greta says. And Dad's like, well, then what do you suggest? What should we do? And that's what she's like, I don't know. She shrugs her shoulders and starts to cry. Right. So what does that mean? Get rid of him, set him free, kill him? Which one of them was she going to volunteer to stop? If she cares for him, was she going to stomp him? And she starts to justify getting rid of him, which I think anytime someone starts to justify some sort of action.
Murder. Once you've reached the point that you're justifying murder, I think you're pretty far gone.
Yeah. No one could accuse us of doing anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah, but you know who it is.
Or was.
If he had turned into a puppy or a bird or a fox instead of a bug, you wouldn't be contemplating this. Which I think is also interesting that, Kafka chooses something abhorrent to change him into, right? If he, turned into a labradoodle, no one would want to be offing Gregor right now. They would take him to the park. But she starts to justify that no one could accuse us of doing anything wrong. But Gregor graciously goes into his room and
he dies.
He just dies on his own.
Dies of a broken heart, I suppose.
I wrote that down. I thought maybe. Is he broken-hearted?
It's probably the most cliche way to die in a novel, but dies of a broken heart.
Yeah. Well, and then I thought, again, going along with the inaction, he stops eating. He doesn't try to care for himself in any way. He doesn't try to communicate with them. Like, he doesn't... Speaking of communicating, Clank is snoring so loud. Hi. Hey, buddy. Clank, my pug, is having issues, and I have to take him to the vet today. It makes me very sad. He's just, collapsing for no reason.
Does he have an apple stuck in his rear?
No.
Okay. Might as well check
of all the things wrong that could be wrong with his rear, that is not wrong.
That's not it.
Anyway. Poor little pug. Is Gregor committing suicide through this inaction in some extremely passive way? Stops eating, stops caring, stops trying anything. He's not even wishing that it would go back. Remember in the beginning, he was like, maybe if I just lay here, everything will go back. But it doesn't. Nobody really seems to lament that too much. They kind of lament my life, not I wish Gregor were here. I wish he were back. So, is he depressed? I would be depressed.
I think so.
If I were him.
So I think your comment about the fact that he turned into a horrific bug as opposed to, a puppy or something cute that the family wouldn't mind taking care of, I think that is a very key point. So what this book made me think of with Gregor being in his room and being completely beholden to the family taking care of him, I thought about, say, the terminal illness of a loved one. And by the end of the book, Gregor is speaking in terms that you hear, an elderly family member like, oh, I don't want to be a burden and the family's better off without me. And thinking about, well, had he turned into something else, would it be easier to take care of them? It's still Gregor either way, whether it's a bug or a, cute animal. So should that matter? Is his humanity and his worth tied to whatever his condition is? And, thinking about, say, an elderly family member or someone with a terminal illness that is completely beholden to the family, as difficult as it is to take care of that person, is their worth not the same whether they are a cockroach or a puppy?
That's interesting you say his human worth, or however you phrased it just now, because if you can't identify with someone personally, or you can't identify with an animal, so to speak, then you can't feel, I don't think, those feelings that you need to feel in order to take care of it. You can't empathize. So if you don't, I think that's why one reason why I think fiction is so important, because we are able to identify as the reader with Gregor in his state, but his family is not. So they don't see him as anything in which they share any sort of characteristic, any sort of feeling, any sort of connection at all. And so then it's easier to say, well, he doesn't matter. He doesn't have these human characteristics anymore. And I think that might happen, with people who are elderly or whose mind isn't what it used to be, and you suddenly feel this great divide and you don't know how to identify or connect with them anymore. And so it makes it harder to do the things that you need to do to care for them as people, which I think also, it's one of the ways that we can divide ourselves, along the lines humans divide themselves, gender identity or race or politics or whatever, because you can't see a piece of yourself in the other human. And therefore now they are, in some cases, less human in people's minds. And so there's no empathy
it's the dehumanization of the other, right? If they're not human, then you can justify doing all kinds of things, right? I mean, it's why the president calls illegal immigrants animals and whatnot, because if you take away the humanity, then sure, you can throw them in cages and do whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing here. Once they've identified that Gregor is no longer their brother, their son, it's that thing in that room over there, then it's a lot easier to, get rid of it and sort of feel nothing when the charwoman's like, hey, I got rid of it. And you're just like, okay, great.
Yeah. Sure. And then they want to fire her the very next day. They're not thankful. They're not grateful. Like, how were they going to get rid of him? Were they going to stomp him? Were they going to kill him, knowing that, this was Gregor?
Right.
But she takes care of it. She doesn't kill him, but she cleans him up. So they don't have to do anything. And then they are going to dismiss her. Like, how dare she? What?
I think
she just cleaned
it's how
up
we
your
can,
mess.
as Americans, shuffle off elderly people to nursing homes and then get angry at the nursing home staff for the way that grandma's been treated or whatever. It's like, well, you're not doing anything more for her because it is this burdensome thing of, but then once the charwoman's removed Gregor and they're done, they're all just like, hey, let's go for a walk. It's a nice day out. And suddenly, and this is the reversal, suddenly their jobs seem great. They've got prospects at work. Hey, we might get promoted. Things are going good now.
Let's marry off Greta.
Right.
She's ready. Look at how rosy her cheeks suddenly are.
She jumped off the train first. She's ready to go.
She really is. The other thing that I find interesting in their inaction is they made zero attempt to try to communicate with him. Again, they assume that he doesn't understand them, but they didn't try. Like, maybe Gregor can still read. If you write something down, can he point yes or no to something? Could they have done anything to communicate with him at all? Like, let's just test this out. Gregor, crawl to mom if you want another bowl of milk with bread floating in it. Crawl to dad if you'd like some old cheese. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
They didn't do anything at all. And so again, I think had they done that and seen that he could communicate, that would have foiled this eventual getting rid of. I wonder how early, we have to get rid of them. Actually, if this were real life, had popped into their head. Like this burden. Okay, no, it's not a burden. It's my brother. But
sure, it's the whole, if they're talking with Gregor and they're actually communicating with him, he's no longer a thing. He's now imparted some humanity on them. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the same thing with, why you can hate a group of people, but then you meet someone from that group and, this nice guy, I like that person. Or if you're a POW, you're supposed to try to make connections with your captors and show their humanity and make a connection. Because once the person sees you as another person, it's harder to kill you or to hate you. Or the fact that they never did make any kind of communication attempts with Gregor, it was easier to eventually read into his thoughts and actions. And I think that's just a point for human communication in general. Like, if you're not open and honest with another person in just any kind of friendship relationship or coworkers or whatever, you can read into things and assume, attribute motive and malice to different actions or inactions. And that's exactly what the two groups of people in this book were doing. The family, was thinking they knew what Gregor wanted, and Gregor was thinking he knew what the family was doing and wanted. And without communication between the two of them, those two things just continue to diverge to the point where they were completely 180 out from each other.
And again, it makes it easier to do whatever the story is you've told yourself about what's happening. It makes it easier to do the thing that you want to do. In my previous job, our boss really pushed us to go ask the question, go find out. There was no like, well, I think that this person did this because. And he's like,
did you ask them?
Did you ask? No. Okay,
right,
go ask.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh, I gotta ask. Okay. Because if you don't ask, people aren't necessarily going to tell you because they've got their own story of, well, if I say this, then this will happen. And, there's no point.
Right.
Or, fill in whatever they might say. And it is really hard to go ask and then to get the real story or help people walk through that real story. But but then you're astounded by like how wrong you were. And you have your own 180 with whatever the situation is, thinking like, oh, I had assumed this person did this for some malicious reason or because they're a liar or because they are lying, not necessarily they are a liar in general. And then you go and you find out like, no, they were just really nervous.
If only we could speak
really
to the
scared.
Cockroaches. You would find they just want to be friends. They're not trying to be annoying or run all over your food. They just want to be friends. Get invited.
Could you please stop moving the furniture? It's giving me a headache. That terrible hissing sound. Stop it. Play the violin. I don't know. I kind of wish that somebody probably did write some fan fiction about what if they had communicated with Gregor? What would it be like to have him just be a part of the family now? Or
I am definitely a Charwoman stan, and I have shipped her with Gregor in my headcanon.
Let's do a whole book on her perspective and her relationship with the dung beetle, as she calls it. She's like, dung beetle. But she doesn't hesitate to threaten him when he comes too close. Right. She's like, no, I'll smash you with this chair. Try me.
She was not having it. She did not care. She's like, giant bug, whatever. I've seen worse. Yeah. So that kind of wraps up the Metamorphosis, huh?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't wrap up what we talked about just earlier, and I quickly Googled it. It's not the Brownsville Schoolhouse.
It's not.
No, it's Enoch Brown. The Enoch Brown School Massacre of 1764.
There you go. It had the word Brown in it. We were both close.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a schoolhouse in the province of Pennsylvania, Greencastle, where we're from. There was a schoolmaster, Enoch Brown, and 9 students, and 2 others were wounded. So someone survived with me.
2 others.
I didn't have any friends. So.
Well, there you go, listeners. Now you've learned some South Central Pennsylvania history you did not know before.
Yeah, and it was 4 members of the Lenape tribe.
There you go.
Delaware American Indians. But only 4 of them.
Well, they were kids. How many adults do you really take out
tribe.
A schoolroom of children? I mean, I could probably do it by myself.
This is taking a terrible turn.
So yeah, that kind of finishes up Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. So if you like what we're doing here, why don't you rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CYSTpod. And you can hit us up on our Facebook page, the Classics You Slept Through Facebook group, or send us an email, cystpod@gmail.com. Next week, we will discuss our next book, which will be very fun and interesting, I think.
We shall reveal it next week.
If you have any thoughts on The Metamorphosis, send those to us. We'll talk about those next week. So until next time, this has been Classics You Slept Through. I think I hear the bell for recess. Let's go.
Kickball.